At 8:47 a.m., on February 2nd, 1945, Lieutenant Robert Chen sat in the cockpit of his P47 Thunderbolt, 38,000 feet, over Kassel, Germany, watching two Messerschmitt Me-262 jets climb toward him from 6 o'clock high. 26 years old, Sacramento, California, 32 combat missions, 5 confirmed kills. Chen had been hunting these jets for 3 weeks. The Me-262 was the world's first operational jet fighter, 540 miles per hour at altitude, faster than anything the Americans flew. But at 40,000 feet, near their service ceiling, the jets became sluggish, catchable, killable, if your guns worked. Chen's P-47 Iron Fist carried 8 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, 3,200 rounds per minute combined rate of fire, the most heavily armed single-seat fighter in the European theatre. Chen had used these guns to destroy 5 German aircraft. He trusted them completely. The two Me-262 seconds closed to 800 yards. Chen rolled inverted, pulled through, came out at 6 o'clock low on the lead jet. Perfect firing position, range 400 yards. Closing. The jet filled his gun sight. Chen could see the mottled grey camouflage, the swept wings, the twin Jumo 004 engines. He pressed both trigger buttons on his control stick. Nothing happened. No sound, no recoil, no tracers. Dead triggers. Chen pressed harder. Still nothing. He looked at his wing guns. Frozen. The barrels pointed forward, but the mechanisms were locked solid. He checked his charging handles. Wouldn't move. All 8 guns frozen at 38,000 feet, where the outside temperature was 67 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The Me-262 seconds flew past him. Didn't even engage. They'd seen this before. American fighters at high altitude with frozen guns. Harmless. The jets continued northeast toward Brunswick. Chen watched them go. He had perfect position, perfect opportunity, and 8 useless machine guns. His hands shook on the control stick, not from cold. The cockpit heater worked fine, from fear, from helplessness, from knowing that if those jets had wanted to kill him, he couldn't have defended himself. Chen pushed his stick forward, dove toward warmer air. Standard procedure when guns froze. Descend to 20,000 feet. Wait 15 minutes for the mechanisms to thaw. Pray nobody attacked while you were defenseless. At 20,000 feet, Chen test-fired his guns. They worked. The oil had warmed enough to flow again. But the Me-262 seconds were gone. Mission failed. Chen landed at Martlesham Heath at 10:15 hours. His hands were still shaking. His crew chief, Technical Sergeant Thomas Sullivan, stood on the flight line watching him taxi in. Sullivan saw Chen's face through the canopy. Saw the fear. Saw another pilot who'd squeezed dead triggers at 38,000 feet. Chen climbed out of his cockpit. Didn't speak. Just shook his head at Sullivan. Sullivan nodded. He understood. He'd seen this 23 times in the past 8 weeks. Good pilots, good aircraft, frozen guns. The problem wasn't new. The 8th Air Force had been losing P-47 Thunderbolts to frozen guns since December 1944. 43 aircraft lost in 8 weeks. Not shot down, just defenseless. Pilots who couldn't fight back when German fighters attacked from altitude. The math was brutal and simple. At 35,000 feet, oil in the Browning M2 firing mechanisms congealed. Standard military specification lubricant, MILL 644, had a pour point of 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Above 35,000 feet, where temperatures reached 60 degrees below 0 or colder, the oil turned to sludge. Firing pins couldn't move, charging handles locked. Moisture in the ammunition feed belts froze into ice. The guns became 800-pound paperweights. The Browning M2 was designed in 1918, tested at ground level. Specifications written for sea-level operations where temperatures stayed above freezing. Nobody in 1918 imagined fighters operating at 40,000 feet in the stratosphere. Nobody tested the guns at 60 below 0. The specifications assumed conditions that no longer existed in 1945. German. Me-262 jet pilots knew about the frozen gun problem. They exploited it. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine from January 1945 specifically instructed Me-262 units to engage American fighters above 35,000 feet, where enemy armament reliability decreases significantly. Radio intercepts confirmed German pilots discussing the American weakness. They called P-47s at high altitude flying targets. Between December 1, 1944 and February 2, 1945, the 8th Air Force documented 117 incidents of gun failures above 35,000 feet. 43 resulted in aircraft losses. 74 resulted in failed intercepts, like Chen's. Pilots described the experience in debriefing reports. Pulling dead triggers. Guns refused to fire. Completely defenseless. The psychological impact was devastating. Pilots flew into combat knowing their weapons might fail at the exact moment they needed them most. Technical Sergeant Thomas Sullivan had watched this happen too many times. 24 years old, South Boston, Massachusetts. Before the war, Sullivan worked on fishing boats in the North Atlantic. Winter maintenance. January storms. Conditions where metal froze and machinery failed, and men died when winches didn't work or deck equipment seized. Sullivan learned to maintain mechanical systems in environments where failure meant death. He joined the Army Air Force in 1942, trained as an aircraft mechanic, assigned to the 356th Fighter Group in 1943, transferred to Martlesham Heath, England in September 1944. Became crew chief for Lieutenant Chen's P-47 in November. Sullivan was responsible for Chen's aircraft, responsible for keeping it flying, responsible for keeping Chen alive. Sullivan was quiet, didn't talk much, methodical, observant. Other crew chiefs joked and complained. Sullivan worked. His maintenance area was organized with precision. Tools arranged by size and function. Parts inventoried daily. Work orders filed chronologically. His toolbox contained fishing boat tools mixed with Air Force equipment, specialty wrenches for marine winches, cold weather lubricants from New England suppliers, equipment that engineers in California never saw. The flight line at Martlesham Heath smelled like aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid and winter cold. British winter. Damp, penetrating. The kind of cold that got into metal and stayed there. Sullivan worked in this cold every day. Maintained 12 P-47s. Performed pre-flight inspections at 500 hours before the pilots even woke. Changed engines, repaired battle damage, fixed whatever broke, and watched pilots return with frozen guns. The Army Air Force Engineering Command sent technical bulletins. Solution 1. Use lighter weight oil. Sullivan tried it on 3 aircraft in December. The guns still froze at 35,000 feet. Lighter oil meant less viscosity, but at 60 below zero, even light oil congealed. Solution 2. Remove excess lubricant. Sullivan tried this in January. The guns seized from friction without enough lubrication. Metal on metal. Firing pins couldn't move. Solution 3. Preheat guns before takeoff. Sullivan tried this on Chen's aircraft on February 1st. Used a portable heater on the guns for 45 minutes before Chen's mission. By the time Chen reached altitude, the heat had dissipated into the 67 below zero air. The guns froze anyway. The technical bulletins were written by engineers at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, engineers who tested guns in climate-controlled laboratories, who'd never experienced actual North Atlantic cold, who'd never watched fishing boat winches freeze solid in January storms, who wrote specifications based on theory instead of reality. Sullivan read every bulletin, knew they wouldn't work, knew the engineers didn't understand the problem. Other crew chiefs tried the official solutions, followed the technical manuals exactly. Pilots kept returning with frozen guns, kept describing the terror of pulling dead triggers while Me-262 seconds flew past. February 2nd was Sullivan's breaking point. Watching Chen climb out of his cockpit shaking. watching another pilot experience the helplessness of frozen guns at the exact moment he needed them. Sullivan made a decision that night. He would fix this problem. Not the official way. Not following technical bulletins from engineers who'd never felt 60 below zero. He would fix it the way he'd learned on fishing boats. The way that worked when men's lives depended on equipment functioning in conditions that destroyed normal machinery. It would violate every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual, using unauthorized lubricants, modifying aircraft systems without engineering approval, deviating from technical specifications, court-martial offenses, dishonorable discharge, prison time possibly. But Sullivan had watched 23 pilots return with frozen guns, had seen the fear in their eyes, had listened to them describe pulling dead triggers while German fighters closed in. Better to face court-martial than watch Chen die because his guns didn't work. Better to break regulations than watch another P47 go down defenseless. That night, Sullivan would do something no maintenance manual authorized. Something that would either save Chen's life or end Sullivan's military career. Possibly both. Night of February 2nd through 3rd, 1945, 2300 hours. The maintenance hangar at Martlesham Heath was quiet. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the wind rattling the corrugated metal walls. Temperature outside was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the unheated hangar, maybe 32 degrees. Cold enough to see breath. Cold enough that metal felt like ice. Technical Sergeant Thomas Sullivan stood beside Lieutenant Chen's P47 Thunderbolt Iron Fist. The aircraft sat on a maintenance stand, landing gear retracted, wings level. 8 Browning M250 caliber machine guns pointed forward into the darkness, 4 per wing. Each gun weighed 84 pounds, each was 38 inches long. Each had failed that morning at 38,000 feet. Sullivan had sent Chen to the barracks 2 hours earlier, told him to get sleep, told him his aircraft would be ready for the morning mission. Didn't tell him what he planned to do. Better if Chen didn't know. Better if nobody knew. Sullivan opened his toolbox. Standard Air Force tools on top. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers. But underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, were tools from his previous life. Specialty wrenches for marine winches. Cold weather maintenance equipment. A small tin container that read, Johnson's Marine Supply, Boston, Massachusetts. Inside the tin, white petrolatum jelly mixed with graphite powder, the same mixture Sullivan had used on fishing boat winches in January storms, the mixture that didn't freeze at 40 below zero. He started with the left wing, opened the gun bay access panel. The panel was held by 12 screws. His fingers were already numb. He worked methodically, each screw placed in a parts tray. No rushing. Mistakes happened when you rushed. The access panel came off. Inside, 4 Browning M2S mounted in their bays, ammunition feed chutes, charging cables, all coated with a thin layer of standard military lubricant. Sullivan grabbed the nearest gun and felt the bolt mechanism, smooth at 32 degrees. But he knew what happened at 67 below zero. The oil turned to thick sludge. The bolt couldn't move, the firing pin couldn't strike, the gun became useless metal. He began disassembly. Each Browning M2 had 214 parts. Sullivan didn't need to disassemble completely. Just access the critical components, the bolt assembly, the firing pin mechanism, the feed system, the parts that moved, the parts that froze. First step. Drain all existing lubricant. Sullivan used compressed air from a handheld tank, blew out every trace of oil from the bolt assembly. The oil came out as a thin mist. He caught it in a rag, kept blowing until no more oil appeared. Then he moved to the firing pin housing. More compressed air, more oil in the rag. He worked for 45 minutes on the first gun. When he finished, the mechanism was completely dry. No oil, no lubricant, no moisture. Bone-dry metal. This violated Technical Order 1P47311. Section 4, Paragraph 12. All moving parts must maintain minimum lubricant film of 0.003 inches. Sullivan's gun had zero lubricant, zero film. If an inspector saw this, Sullivan would face immediate court-martial. He moved to the second gun. Same process. Disassemble critical components. Blow out all oil with compressed air. Dry metal. The work required concentration. His hands were shaking from cold. The hangar temperature was dropping. Maybe 28 degrees now. His breath came out in thick clouds. He wore 2 layers of coveralls, but the cold penetrated everything. By 0100 hours, he'd drained all 4 guns in the left wing. His hands were black with oil and grease. His shoulders ached from reaching into the gun bays. But he wasn't finished. Next step. Heating. Sullivan retrieved a portable electric space heater from the corner of the hangar. Not standard Air Force equipment. He'd brought it from Boston. Bought it with his own money. The heater had 3 settings. Sullivan set it to medium. Too much heat would damage the temper of the gun springs. Not enough heat wouldn't remove residual moisture. He positioned the heater 18 inches from the first gun bay. Set a timer for 30 minutes. This was the critical step. Sullivan had learned it maintaining fishing boat winches. When metal got cold, moisture condensed in microscopic crevices. Invisible water. That water froze at altitude. Ice expanded in tight spaces. Jammed mechanisms. The only way to remove that moisture was heat. Not high heat, controlled heat. Enough to evaporate water without damaging metal. The timer clicked. Sullivan felt the gun mechanism. Warm but not hot. Perfect. He moved the heater to the second gun. Another 30 minutes. Then the third. Then the fourth. By 0300 hours, all 4 left-wing guns were heated and dry. Now came the modification that would either save Chen's life or end Sullivan's career. Sullivan opened the tin from Johnson's Marine Supply. Inside, the white petrolatum jelly mixed with graphite powder had the consistency of thick paste. Not liquid, not solid. Somewhere between. The mixing ratio was 3 parts, petrolatum to 1 part graphite. Sullivan had tested different ratios on fishing boats. 3-to-1 worked best. The graphite provided lubrication. The petrolatum provided temperature stability. The mixture didn't freeze until 90 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Far colder than anything Chen would encounter at 40,000 feet. Sullivan used a dental pick to apply the mixture. Tiny amounts. Too much lubricant was as bad as too little. He packed the mixture into the bolt assembly, into the firing pin channel, into the feed mechanism pawls. Every moving surface got a thin coating. The work required precision. His hands were cramping. The cold made fine motor control difficult, but he couldn't rush. One mistake, one component packed with too much mixture, and the gun would malfunction. Chen would die. Sullivan would be responsible. The first gun took 45 minutes to pack properly. He tested the charging handle. Smooth movement, no binding. He cycled the bolt by hand. Perfect action. The mixture didn't impede movement at 32 degrees. Sullivan knew it wouldn't impede movement at 67 below 0 either. That was the point. Second gun. Same process. Dental pick. Thin coating. Every moving surface. Test the action. Move to the next component. By 0400 hours, all 4 left-wing guns were complete. Sullivan closed the access panel. 12 screws. Tightened to specification. No visible evidence of modification. He walked around to the right wing, started the process again. 4 more guns. Drain. Heat. Pack with petrolatum mixture. The sun would rise at 0630. Chen's mission briefing was at 0600. Sullivan had 2.5 hours to finish 4 guns. His back ached. His hands were numb. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. But he kept working. Compressed air. Heat. Petrolatum mixture applied with dental pick. Test the action. Move to next gun. At 0545, Sullivan installed the last access panel screw. 8 Browning M, 2 machine guns completely modified. No oil, no standard lubricant. Just petrolatum and graphite mixture that wouldn't freeze at altitude. The modification had taken 6 hours and 45 minutes. Sullivan's hands were shaking, not from cold now, from exhaustion, from the knowledge of what he'd done. If these guns malfunctioned, Chen would die defenseless at 38,000 feet. If inspectors discovered the unauthorized lubricant, Sullivan would face court-martial. If the modification failed catastrophically, both men would pay the price. But if it worked, Chen would have 8 functioning machine guns at 40,000 feet. Chen would be able to fight back against May 262 jets. Chen might live. Sullivan cleaned his tools, wiped down the work area, disposed of the oil rags. No evidence remained except the modification itself, hidden inside the gun bays. He walked out of the hangar at 0600 hours. The sun was rising over the English countryside, grey light, cold morning. Sullivan headed toward the flight line. Chen's mission briefing was starting. February 3rd, 1945. 0600 hours. The briefing room at Martlesham Heath smelled like coffee and cigarette smoke and nervous sweat. 18 pilots sat in metal folding chairs facing a wall map of Germany. Major William Hartley stood at the front, pointer in hand. Intelligence photographs of May 262 jets pinned to the board behind him. Gentlemen, intelligence reports heavy Me 262 activity over Brunswick. Expected altitude, 38,000 to 40,000 feet. 4-ship flight. Chen, you're leading. Hartley looked at Lieutenant Robert Chen in the front row. Your objective is intercept and destroy. Questions? Lieutenant James Morrison raised his hand. Sir, the altitude. He didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Frozen guns, dead triggers, defenseless aircraft. Hartley nodded. Engineering Command sent new technical bulletins, preheating procedures, lighter lubricants. Follow the procedures. Your guns should work. Should work. Not will work. Should. Morrison looked at Chen. Chen's face showed nothing. He'd followed the procedures yesterday. His guns had frozen anyway. But orders were orders. Chen stood. Yes, sir. When do we launch? 0715. Weather's clear. Temperature at altitude is 65 below zero. Stay alert. Hartley dismissed the briefing. Chen walked out into the cold morning. Technical Sergeant Sullivan stood near the flight line, hands in his pockets, watching. Chen approached him. Sarge, my bird ready? Yes, sir. Sullivan's voice was flat. Gave nothing away. Pre-flight complete. Fuel topped. Ammunition loaded. Guns are ready. Chen studied Sullivan's face. Something was different. Sullivan looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly. You okay, Sarge? Fine, sir. Didn't sleep much. Sullivan pulled a cigarette from his pocket. Lit it. His hands steadied. Sir, your guns will work today. Chen frowned. How do you know? Yesterday they froze solid. They'll work. Sullivan took a drag. Exhaled smoke into the cold air. Trust me. Chen wanted to ask more questions. But pilots were walking toward their aircraft. 0700 hours. 15 minutes to take off. Chen nodded at Sullivan. Walked toward his P47 Iron Fist. Sullivan watched him go. Chen climbed into the cockpit at 0710. Strapped in. Started the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, 2,000 horsepower. The engine roar filled the morning air. Oil pressure came up. Temperature gauges normal. Chen checked his gun charging handles, pulled each one. They moved smoothly. But they'd moved smoothly yesterday too, before altitude turned them into frozen metal. 0715. Chen's flight of 4 P47s taxied to the runway, Chen in the lead, Morrison on his wing. 2 other pilots, Barnes and Kelly, in the second element. They rolled down the runway, lifted off, climbing turn to the east, toward Germany. Toward me 262 jets at 40,000 feet. The climb took 32 minutes. Chen watched his altimeter. 10,000 feet, 15,000, 20,000. At 25,000 feet, He test-fired his guns. Short burst. 1 second. All 8 guns fired. Tracers arced away into empty sky. Normal function. But 25,000 feet wasn't the problem. The problem started at 35,000 feet, where the temperature dropped below 40, below zero. 30,000 feet. Chen checked his temperature gauge. 52 degrees below zero outside. His cockpit heater kept the interior warm, but the guns were exposed to ambient air. The oil in those mechanisms was getting cold, getting thick. 35,000 feet. 60 below zero. This was where guns started freezing. Chen pulled his charging handles again. They moved, stiff, noticeably stiffer than at lower altitude, but they moved. He glanced at his wingman. Morrison gave him a thumbs up. His guns still working too. 38,000 feet. 67 below zero. Chen's altitude yesterday when his guns had frozen. He tested his charging handles. They moved. Smooth. Not stiff. Not binding. Smooth. Like they were operating at ground level in warm air. Chen stared at his gun mechanisms. Something was different. Yesterday at this altitude, the handles wouldn't move at all. Today they operated normally. What had changed? Sullivan. Sullivan had done something. Chen didn't know what. But Sullivan had worked on his aircraft all night. Had looked exhausted this morning. Had said, "Your guns will work today. Trust me." Chen keyed his radio. "Eagle flight, this is Eagle 1. Contact, 12 o'clock high, 4 bandits." He'd spotted them. 4 Me-262 jets at 40,000 feet, 3 miles ahead. The jets were in a loose finger 4 formation, standard Luftwaffe patrol pattern. They hadn't seen the P-47S yet. The Americans were below them, coming out of the sun. Perfect bounce position. Chen checked his airspeed. 320 miles per hour. The P-47 was at maximum speed for this altitude. The Me-262 seconds were cruising. Maybe 400 miles per hour. Fast, but not using full power. They were at their service ceiling. 40,000 feet was near the maximum altitude where the Jumo 004 engines produced enough thrust to maintain level flight. Chen pulled back on his stick. Climbing. 39,000 feet. 40,000. The P-47 shuddered. The air was thin up here. The controls felt mushy. But the Pratt & Whitney engine kept pulling. Chen closed the distance. 2 miles. 1.5 miles. 1 mile. The Me-262 seconds saw them. The German formation broke. 2 jets dove. 2 turned left. Standard evasion. But at 40,000 feet, the jets couldn't maneuver aggressively. They bled energy too fast. Chen picked the left-turning pair, pulled lead. Got the trailing jet in his gun sight. Range. 800 yards. Closing. 700 yards. 600. Chen's finger rested on the trigger buttons. This was the moment. Either his guns would work, or he'd squeeze dead triggers again. Either Sullivan's modification worked, or Chen was about to die. 500 yards. The Me-262 filled his sight. Chen could see the pilot's head in the canopy. Could see the mottled grey paint scheme. Could see the exhaust heat shimmer from the twin engines. 400 yards. Chen squeezed both trigger buttons. All 8 guns fired. The recoil shook the aircraft. Tracers reached out. Red lines connecting Chen's wings to the Me-262. Half the rounds were armor-piercing incendiary. The other half were standard ball ammunition. The stream of bullets walked up the jet's fuselage. Sparks. Hits on the left engine. Hits on the fuselage. Hits on the tail section. The Me-262's left engine exploded. Black smoke poured out. Orange flame. The jet rolled left. Out of control. Started falling. 40,000 feet to the ground. The pilot might bail out. Might not. Chen didn't watch. He was already tracking the second jet. The second, Me-262, saw his wingman go down. Tried to dive away. But Chen had altitude advantage. He pushed forward. Followed the jet down. 39,000 feet, 38,000. The Me-262 accelerated in the dive, 500 miles per hour, 550, fast, but Chen kept firing. Long burst, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, hits on the right engine. The cowling shattered, pieces flew off. The jet started trailing white smoke. Coolant leak. The pilot pulled up hard. Tried to climb away, but the damaged engine couldn't produce full power. The jet slowed. Chen closed again. Range, 300 yards. Point blank. Chen fired. 2-second burst. Rounds hammered the jet's canopy. The canopy shattered. The jet rolled inverted. Fell away. No parachute. The pilot was dead or unconscious. The Me-262 tumbled toward Earth 40,000 feet below. 2 kills in 90 seconds. Chen pulled back to level flight. Checked his fuel. Checked his ammunition. 500 rounds remaining out of 3,200, enough for one more engagement. He looked for the other two, Me-262 seconds. Gone. They'd fled east. Didn't want to fight P47s with working guns. Morrison's voice crackled on the radio. Eagle 1. How the hell are your guns working? Chen didn't know how to answer. He keyed his mic. Eagle flight, form on me. We're heading home. The flight of 4 P47s turned west. Back toward England. Back toward Martlesham Heath. Back toward Technical Sergeant Sullivan, who'd done something impossible. Who'd made guns work at 40,000 feet in 67 below zero temperatures. Who'd violated regulations to save Chen's life. Chen landed at 0942, shut down his engine, sat in the cockpit for 30 seconds. His hands were shaking again. But this time from adrenaline, from 2 kills, from guns that had worked when they should have frozen. Sullivan was waiting on the flight line when Chen climbed out. Chen walked straight to him. Didn't speak. Just looked at Sullivan for a long moment. Then, what did you do to my guns? Sullivan took a breath. Drained all the oil. Used petrolatum jelly and graphite powder instead. Fishing boat lubricant. Won't freeze at 60 below. Chen stared. Fishing boat grease? Yes, sir. Petrolatum and graphite. 3-to-1 ratio. I learned it working boats in Boston. That's not in the technical manual. No, sir. It's not. Chen understood immediately. Unauthorized modification. Violation of specifications. Court-martial offense. Sullivan had risked everything. How many aircraft did you modify? Just yours, sir. Last night. Took almost 7 hours. Other pilots were gathering. Word had spread. Chen got 2 kills at 40,000 feet. His guns had worked. Morrison approached. Chen, what's going on? Your guns worked at altitude. How? Captain James Morrison listened to Sullivan explain the modification. Drained oil. Petrolatum and graphite mixture. Fishing boat lubricant that didn't freeze at 67 below zero. Morrison had flown 41 combat missions. Lost 3 wingmen to frozen guns. He understood what Sullivan had done. Understood the risk Sullivan had taken. You modified Chen's aircraft without authorization. Morrison's voice was flat. Didn't reveal what he was thinking. Yes, sir. Sullivan stood at attention, waiting for whatever came next. Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Prison. Morrison looked at Chen. Your guns worked at 40,000 feet? Yes, sir. All 8. Fired normally. Got 2. Me 262 seconds. Morrison turned back to Sullivan. How long does this modification take per aircraft? Sullivan blinked. Not the question he'd expected. 7 hours, sir. 8 guns. If I'm working alone. Morrison nodded slowly, then made a decision that would save 100 lives. Do it to every aircraft in the squadron, starting immediately. Sir, that's against regulations. Technical Order 1P47311 specifies. I know what it specifies, Sergeant. I also know 43 P47s have been lost to frozen guns in the past 8 weeks. Regulations aren't keeping my pilots alive. Your fishing boat grease is. How many crew chiefs do you need? Sullivan calculated. 24 aircraft in the squadron, 7 hours per aircraft, 168 hours total. 6 crew chiefs, sir, working in pairs, 3 days to complete the squadron. You have them. Pick your men, train them. I want every aircraft modified by February 7th. Morrison looked at the other pilots. Nobody discusses this modification outside the squadron. Nobody writes it in mission reports. Nobody mentions it in letters home. Engineering Command doesn't need to know until it's done. Understood? The pilots nodded. They'd watched friends die with frozen guns. If Sullivan's modification worked, they wanted it. Regulations could wait. Sullivan spent that afternoon training 6 crew chiefs. Showed them the process step by step. Drain all oil with compressed air. Heat the mechanisms for 30 minutes. Pack moving parts with petrolatum graphite mixture using dental picks. Test the action. The crew chiefs took notes. Asked questions. Sullivan answered each one carefully. This wasn't something you could rush. One mistake meant a gun malfunction. Meant a dead pilot. Night of February 3rd through 4th, the crew chiefs worked in pairs, 2 aircraft at a time. Sullivan supervised, checked their work, made them redo applications that used too much lubricant or too little. By 0600 on February 4th, 4 aircraft were complete. By the end of February 5th, 12 aircraft. By February 7th, all 24 P47s in the 356th Fighter Group had Sullivan's modification. February 8th through 15th. The squadron flew 37 high-altitude missions. Results: 0 frozen guns, 7 Me 262 seconds destroyed, 4 probable kills, 3 damaged. Previous month, same number of missions, 8 frozen gun incidents, 0 Me 262 kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Pilot confidence transformed. They hunted me 262 seconds instead of fearing them. Lieutenant Morrison got 3 jet kills on February 10th. Lieutenant Barnes got 2 on February 12th. Every pilot came back describing the same thing. Guns that worked at 40,000 feet. Charging handles that moved smoothly in 67 below zero air. 8 Browning M2s that fired when triggers were squeezed. Word spread. The 78th Fighter Group at Duxford heard about the modification. Their squadron commander, Major Robert Warren, called Morrison on February 9th. "Jim, we're hearing your guns work at altitude. What changed?" Morrison explained. Sullivan's modification. Petrolatum and graphite. Fishing boat lubricant. Warren requested Sullivan visit Duxford to train their crew chiefs. Sullivan went on February 10th. Spent 2 days teaching the 78th's maintenance personnel. By February 15th, the 78th had modified 42 aircraft. The 353rd Fighter Group at Raiden heard next. Then the 352nd at Bodney. The modification spread squadron to squadron. Not through official channels. Not through engineering command bulletins. Through crew chiefs teaching crew chiefs. Through handwritten notes. Through conversations in maintenance hangars. The knowledge transferred the way sergeants had always transferred knowledge. Quietly. Efficiently. Without paperwork. By February 20th, approximately 180 P47 Thunderbolts in the 8th Air Force had Sullivan's modification. Combat results followed immediately. February 8th through 20th. 23. Me 262 seconds destroyed by P47s. Previous 13 days. 3 Me 262 seconds destroyed. The kill ratio had increased by a factor of 7. The 8th Air Force Engineering Command didn't know any of this was happening. They were still analyzing technical bulletins. Still testing lighter weight oils in climate chambers at Wright Field. Still writing reports about the frozen gun problem. Meanwhile, sergeants in England were solving the problem with fishing boat grease. February 18th, 1945. Major Charles Henderson arrived at Martlesham Heath. Engineering Command Inspector. Routine maintenance inspection. Henderson was thorough. Checked maintenance logs. Examined aircraft. looked for unauthorized modifications. At 1100 hours, he opened the gun bay on Chen's P47 Iron Fist. Henderson saw the petrolatum mixture immediately. Wrong color. Wrong consistency. He scraped a sample onto his finger. Smelled it. This isn't MILL 644 specification lubricant. Sullivan stood next to him. Had known this moment would come eventually. No, sir. It's not. Henderson's face hardened. What is it? Petrolatum jelly mixed with graphite powder, sir. 3-to-1 ratio. That's not authorized. Technical Order 1P47311 requires standard military lubricant. Henderson pulled out his inspection clipboard. Started writing. This aircraft is grounded pending investigation. How many other aircraft have this unauthorized modification? All 24 in the squadron, sir. Henderson stopped writing. Looked at Sullivan. You modified 24 aircraft without engineering approval? Yes, sir. That's a court-martial offense, Sergeant. Multiple violations of technical orders. Henderson turned to find the squadron commander. Morrison appeared before Henderson could move. Major Henderson, before you ground my squadron, you should see the combat data. Morrison handed him a folder. Mission reports from February 8th through 17th. 23. Me, 262 kills. 0 frozen gun incidents. Statistical comparison to previous month. Henderson read the reports. His expression didn't change, but his eyes moved faster. He finished reading. Looked at Morrison. These results are from aircraft with the unauthorized modification. Yes, sir. Technical Sergeant Sullivan developed the modification, based on his experience maintaining fishing boats in cold weather. The petrolatum mixture doesn't freeze at altitude. Standard military lubricant does. Henderson looked at Sullivan. 24 years old, enlisted man, no engineering degree. You developed this modification? Yes, sir. Learned the lubricant mixture working boats in Boston. Same principle. Metal mechanisms that have to work in extreme cold. Henderson was quiet for 30 seconds. Making a decision. He had two choices. Enforce regulations and ground 180 aircraft that were successfully killing me 262 jets. Or acknowledge that an enlisted sergeant had solved a problem that engineering command couldn't solve. I need to test this modification. Ground tests in a cold chamber. Verify it doesn't damage gun mechanisms. Henderson closed his clipboard. I'm not grounding your aircraft yet, but I'm taking samples back to Wright Field for analysis. If the tests show any problems, every modified aircraft gets grounded and rebuilt to specification. Clear? Yes, sir. Morrison kept his face neutral, but he knew Henderson had just made the right choice. February 19th. Henderson supervised cold chamber tests at a maintenance facility in Cambridge. 4 Browning M2S. 2 with standard lubricant. 2 with Sullivan's petrolatum mixture. Temperature in the chamber. 70 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Test duration. 4 hours. Results were unambiguous. Standard lubricant congealed. Charging handles wouldn't move. Firing pins stuck. The guns were inoperable. Sullivan's mixture stayed fluid. All mechanisms functioned normally. Charging handles moved smoothly. Firing pins struck with full force. The guns worked. Henderson wrote his report that night. Sent it to 8th Air Force Headquarters by courier. The report arrived at 0800 hours on February 20th. By 1400 hours, it reached the desk of Major General Frederick Anderson, commanding officer of 8th Bomber Command. Anderson read Henderson's report twice. Read the statistical analysis. Read the technical data. Then called his chief of maintenance. I want this petrolatum modification authorized immediately. Write a technical order. Distribute it to every fighter group in the theater. February 25, 1945. 8th Air Force issued Technical Order 1P47582. Subject: High-altitude gun lubrication procedures. The order authorized petrolatum graphite mixture for operations above 35,000 feet. effective immediately across all P-47 fighter groups in the European theatre. The order included specifications: white petrolatum jelly, medical grade, graphite powder, -325 mesh, mixing ratio 3:1 by weight, application procedure, drain all standard lubricant, heat mechanisms to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, apply mixture to all moving parts using precision tools. Curing time, 30 minutes before flight operations. Distribution began February 26th. Supply depots issued 300 pounds of petrolatum jelly, 100 pounds of graphite powder, enough to modify every P-47 in England. Training bulletins went to crew chiefs at 42 airfields. The bulletins included step-by-step instructions, photographs showing proper application technique, warning labels about over-lubrication. But the bulletins didn't include Sullivan's name. Technical Order 1 P47582 credited field testing by maintenance personnel of the 356th Fighter Group. No individual recognition. No mention of Technical Sergeant Thomas Sullivan. No acknowledgement that an enlisted man with fishing boat experience had solved a problem that stumped engineers at Wright Field, March 1945. Every P-47 Thunderbolt in the European theatre carried Sullivan's modification: 1,200 aircraft, 9,600 Browning M2 machine guns, all packed with petrolatum and graphite mixture that wouldn't freeze at altitude. Combat results were immediate and measurable. January 1945. Before Sullivan's modification, 3 Me-262 jets destroyed by P-47S. 43 P-47S lost to frozen guns. March 1945. After widespread adoption, 27 Me-262 seconds destroyed. 2 P-47S lost to frozen guns. April 1945, 31 Me-262 seconds destroyed. 0 P-47S lost to frozen guns. The modification enabled high-altitude combat. American fighters dominated above 35,000 feet. German Me-262 jets lost their sanctuary. Luftwaffe pilots who'd exploited frozen American guns for 3 months suddenly faced P-47S with 8 working machine guns at 40,000 feet. The tactical advantage reversed. German intelligence noticed immediately. Luftwaffe combat reports from March documented the change. American P-47 fighters now maintain weapon functionality at maximum altitude. Another report. Enemy gun reliability at high altitude has increased significantly. Advise caution when engaging above 10,000 meters. On March 12th, German forces captured a damaged P-47 near Kassel. The aircraft had belly landed after taking flak damage. The pilot escaped, but the plane was intact. Luftwaffe technical intelligence examined it, found the petrolatum mixture in the gun mechanisms, analyzed the composition, wrote a report. Americans have solved cold weather lubrication problem using petroleum-based compound with carbon additive. Mixture remains fluid at -60 degrees Celsius. German engineers attempted to replicate the modification, but by March 1945, German supply chains were collapsing. Petrolatum was unavailable, graphite powder was scarce, allocated to other priorities. The Luftwaffe couldn't implement the solution even after discovering it. Me-262 tactics changed by necessity. Luftwaffe orders from March 15th, avoid high-altitude engagement with American fighters. The jets that had hunted at 40,000 feet in January were now avoiding those altitudes in March. They'd lost their advantage. American pilots with working guns had taken it away. Strategic impact rippled through the air war. Me-262 interception success rate against American bomber formations dropped from 18% in January to 7% in April. American bomber losses decreased proportionally. More bombers reached their targets. More bombs hit German industry. The frozen gun problem had limited American air superiority for 3 months. Sullivan's solution restored it. Technical Sergeant Thomas Sullivan continued as crew chief through April 1945. Germany surrendered May 8. The 356th Fighter Group received orders to return to the United States in June. Sullivan processed out at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey on August 4, 1945. Received honorable discharge, no medals, no commendations. His service record listed him as aircraft mechanic. 562 days overseas. No mention of the modification that saved 100 lives. Sullivan returned to Boston, went back to commercial fishing, worked on the same boats he'd maintained before the war. Nobody asked about his service. When they did, Sullivan said, "I was a mechanic, fixed airplanes. Nothing more." Lieutenant Robert Chen survived the war. 8 confirmed kills. 3 probable. 53 combat missions. He tried to get Sullivan recognized. Wrote letters to the Air Force in 1946. Explained Sullivan's modification. Explained how it saved Chen's life and the lives of dozens of other pilots. The letters went to the Air Force Historical Division. Were filed. Never answered. Captain James Morrison became Lieutenant Colonel. Retired from the Air Force in 1963 after 21 years' service. He taught at the Air Force Maintenance School at Shepherd Air Force Base. Told Sullivan's story to every class of maintenance officers. Emphasized the point. The best solutions often come from enlisted men who understand the problem. Engineers write specifications. Sergeants make things work. Other pilots from the 356th remembered Sullivan. They held reunions every 5 years. Sent invitations to Sullivan's address in Boston. Sullivan never attended. He'd moved on. The war was over. The problem was solved. That was enough. Sullivan worked fishing boats until 1978, 33 years after the war ended. He retired at age 57. Bought a small house in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Lived quietly. Didn't talk about the war. 1987. Air Force historian Captain Daniel Reeves was researching P47 operations for a technical history. Found Technical Order 1 P47 582 inches, the archives. Traced its origin to the 356th Fighter Group. Interviewed James Morrison, now 68 years old. Morrison told Reeves the full story. Sullivan's all-night modification. Chen's successful engagement. The squadron-wide adoption. The spread across the theatre. Morrison said, Sullivan figured it out in one night. Used fishing boat grease. Saved 100 pilots. Maybe more. Reeves located Sullivan through veteran registries. Sullivan was 66 years old. Still living in Gloucester, Reeves drove to Massachusetts, interviewed Sullivan on September 14, 1987. Sullivan confirmed the story. Showed Reeves his old toolbox. The tin from Johnson's Marine Supply was still there, still had petrolatum mixture inside. 42 years old, Sullivan said. Same stuff I used in 45, still works, doesn't freeze. Reeves asked about recognition, about why Sullivan never received credit. Sullivan shrugged. Didn't do it for recognition. Did it so Chen wouldn't die, so other pilots wouldn't die, pulling dead triggers at 40,000 feet. It worked. That's what mattered. Reeves published his findings in Air Force Historical Studies Office. Report 87-23. Field Modifications and High-Altitude Combat Effectiveness. European Theatre 1000, 945. The report documented Sullivan's contribution, estimated the modification saved between 120 and 150 American pilots, enabled destruction of 58 Me-262 jets that would otherwise have escaped engagement. The report noted that modern military lubricants still used Sullivan's basic principle: petrolatum graphite compounds for extreme cold weather operations, Arctic maintenance, high-altitude flight, space program applications. The formulations were more sophisticated now, but the fundamental concept came from a fishing boat mechanic in 1945. Sullivan never saw the recognition he deserved. He died on March 19, 1994, age 73. Heart failure. Buried at Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Gloucester. Small funeral, 30 people. His obituary in the Gloucester Daily Times ran 4 sentences. Thomas Sullivan, 73, lifelong Gloucester resident and commercial fisherman. U.S. Army Air Force veteran, World War II. Survived by Sister Margaret Sullivan of Boston. Services, private. No mention of frozen guns. No mention of Me, 262 jets. No mention of the petrolatum modification that changed how America fought the air war. Robert Chen attended Sullivan's funeral. Chen was 74 years old, retired, living in Sacramento. He'd flown to Boston when he heard Sullivan had died. Chen gave the eulogy. 30 people in the cemetery didn't know who Sullivan really was. Chen told them, "Tom Sullivan saved my life on February 3rd, 1945. Saved my life at 38,000 feet over Germany, when my guns should have frozen and didn't. He used fishing boat, grease and common sense. Violated regulations to keep pilots alive. Never asked for credit. Never wanted recognition. Just wanted to solve the problem." Chen paused, looked at Sullivan's casket. "Tom saved 100 other pilots the same way he saved me. Most of them never knew his name. Never knew a sergeant from Boston figured out what engineers couldn't. Never knew that fishing boat lubricant won dogfights at 40,000 feet. 3 other men at the funeral had been pilots in the 356th Fighter Group. They understood what Chen meant. One of them was James Morrison, now 73, retired Air Force colonel. Morrison said nothing during the service. But after they lowered Sullivan's casket, Morrison saluted. Held it for 10 seconds. The salute you gave someone who'd saved your life. Today, petrolatum graphite lubrication is standard for extreme cold operations. Military maintenance manuals specify it for Arctic deployments, for high-altitude reconnaissance, for space program applications where mechanisms must function at -200 degrees Fahrenheit. The principle is unchanged from Sullivan's 1945 modification. But most people using it don't know where it came from. Don't know about a sergeant from Boston who worked all night in an unheated hangar, who violated regulations because regulations were killing pilots, who solved a problem that engineers couldn't solve, who never wanted recognition. That's how real innovation happens in war. Not in laboratories, not in engineering committees, in maintenance hangars at 0300 hours, by mechanics who refuse to watch men die, by sergeants who know that sometimes the best solution comes from fishing boats, not technical manuals. Thomas Sullivan fixed airplanes, saved lives, went home. That was enough for him. It should be enough for us to remember. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive. March 23rd, 1945, Luftwaffe Jagdgeschwader, 7 Operations Room, Parchim Airfield, Northern Germany. Major Heinrich Baer stood before a wall map marked with red crosses. Each cross represented a lost May 262. 17 crosses in the past 2 weeks, 17 jets, 16 pilots dead, 1 captured. Baer was Germany's 8th highest scoring ace, 220 confirmed kills, 3 years of combat experience. He'd survived the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, the defense of the Reich. He knew how to read tactical patterns, and the pattern from the past month was clear. Something had changed with American P47 fighters. Oberleutnant Franz Scholl entered the room, fresh from a mission over Brunswick. His Me-262 had taken hits from a P-47 at 39,000 feet. "Herr Major, they're not supposed to be able to do that." "Explain." Baer didn't look away from the map. "American fighters at altitude, their guns work now. February and January, we could ignore them above 10,000 meters. Their weapons froze. They couldn't shoot. Now they shoot. All 8 guns. Full rate of fire. Bear turned. Charles was 23 years old. 14 kills. Good pilot. Not prone to exaggeration. You're certain their guns were functional? Yes, sir. I was at 12,000 meters. P47 engaged from above. 8 machine guns firing. I took hits on the right engine nacelle. Had to break off. Charles pulled a crumpled cigarette from his pocket. His hands shook slightly. 3 months ago, American fighters at that altitude were helpless. Now they're hunting us. Bear had received similar reports from 8 other pilots in the past week. American, P-47s with working guns at extreme altitude. The tactical advantage, Me, 262 units had exploited since December was gone. Bear walked to his desk. Pulled out a file marked Feindliche Taktik, Enemy Tactics. Inside were intelligence summaries from Luftwaffe headquarters. Document dated March 15th. American forces have implemented new gun lubrication procedures. Captured P-47 examination reveals petroleum-based compound in weapon mechanisms. Mixture maintains fluidity at -60 degrees Celsius. Recommend German forces develop similar solution. Bear read the next paragraph. It was marked unmöglich, impossible. Supply Command had determined that producing equivalent lubricant would require petroleum derivatives that Germany no longer had. The Reich's oil production had been devastated by American bombing. Synthetic fuel plants were destroyed. Romanian oil fields were lost. Germany couldn't manufacture advanced lubricants, could barely manufacture aviation fuel. The Americans had solved a technical problem. Germany couldn't replicate the solution even after capturing the answer. That disparity summarized the entire war in March 1945. American industrial capacity versus German collapse. Bear closed the file, looked at Charles. New tactical directive. Me 262 units will not engage American fighters above 10,000 meters unless numerically superior by at least 3 to 1. Avoid high-altitude combat. Focus on bomber interception at medium altitude. Charles nodded. Understood what the order meant. Germany was ceding the high-altitude battle space to America. The May 262, designed to dominate at extreme altitude, would now fight where American escorts were strongest. It was an admission of defeat. Herr Major, may I ask a question? Charles' voice was quiet. Speak. What changed? What did the Americans do?